This presentation covers revisions made to the July 2025 OATS manual. I'm Gary Harrington and I work for the Ohio Department of Transportation Central Office in the Office of Roadway Engineering. A list of all revisions can be found on the OATS website in the OATS Manual Revision Log section. Before I begin, I'd like to point out revisions in the OATS manual are easy to find. Simply search for New or Revised. Section 5.2 Peak Hour Factor. The previous version of the OATS manual said to use the ramp intersection peak hour factor for the ramp peak hour factor. This was revised, stating the peak hour factor of the off-ramp and on-ramp needs to be calculated. Example 5.2e was added to Appendix E, which I will show on the next slide. This is example 5.2e. Section 5.9, Operational Goals of Mainline and Intersections. Two revisions were made to this section. First, the previous version of the OATS manual included goals whether a project was inside or outside of a metropolitan planning organization, otherwise known as an MPO. This has been consolidated. The reference to whether a project is inside or outside of an MPO has been removed. Second, language was added to the intersection operational goal stating a level of service E may be acceptable at locations where a vulnerable user project on a low-speed facility is implemented if the build condition does not have a significant adverse impact on the safety and operations within the study area. Section 6.2.1.1 Freeways. Several revisions were made to this section. 1. Examples A through E previously referenced the wrong section. 2. Real-world examples were added for merge, diverge, weaving, overlap, and basic segments. 3. Additional examples were added to Appendix F. 4. ODOT now requires the various segments to be measured and submitted in Google Earth when preparing analyses with HCS facilities. I will discuss this more in a minute. 5. For measuring lengths, the analyst can measure to the nearest 5 feet. When ODOT reviews HCS facilities analyses, we will accept the lengths as long as they are within the lengths shown in the table. Appendix F. Example 6.2.1.1a Merge Segment. Several revisions were made to this section. First, real-world examples have been added showing how to determine various inputs for a merge segment. Second, information on the 500-foot ramp influence area was added. Information on the acceleration lane length of a one-lane on-ramp was added. Examples of one-lane on-ramps were added for 4 different scenarios. Information on the acceleration lane length of a 2-lane on-ramp was added. Note, due to ODOT standards, it is highly unlikely the 2 acceleration lane lengths as shown in Figure 6 will occur within the ramp influence area of 1,500 feet. ODOT will post a Google Earth KMZ file for all the examples shown. Example 1 shows a typical merge segment for a one-lane on-ramp. The freeway length is 1,500 feet and the length of the acceleration length is less than 1,500 feet. The location coordinate below each aerial image is linked to Google Maps. Example number 2 shows a one-lane merge segment where the freeway length is 1,500 feet and the length of the acceleration length is more than 1,500 feet. For this example, the length of acceleration length is truncated at the end of the freeway length of 1,500 feet. Example 3 shows a one-lane merge segment where the freeway length is less than 1,500 feet and the length of the acceleration length is less than the freeway length. Example 4 shows a one-lane merge segment where the on-ramp joins as an add lane. Example 5 shows a merge segment where the 2-lane on-ramp joins as add lanes. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1b, diverge segment. Several revisions were made to this section. First, real-world examples have been added showing how to determine various inputs for a diverge segment. Second, information on the 1,500-foot ramp influence area was added. Information on the deceleration lane length of a one-lane off-ramp was added. Examples of one-lane off-ramps were added for two different scenarios. Information on the deceleration lane length of a two-lane off-ramp was added. Examples of two-lane off-ramps were added for three different scenarios. Note, due to ODOT standards, it is highly unlikely the two deceleration lane lengths as shown in Figure 17 will occur within the ramp influence area of 1,500 feet. Example 1 shows a typical diverse segment for a one-lane off-ramp. The freeway length is 1,500 feet, and the length of the deceleration length is less than 1,500 feet. Example 2 shows a one-lane diverge segment where the off-ramp is a drop lane. Example number 3 shows a two-lane diverge segment where the two lanes of the off-ramp are drop lanes. Example number 4 shows a diverge segment where the deceleration lane length is less than the freeway length and where the two-lane off-ramp has an option lane. Example number 5 shows a diverge segment where the deceleration lane length is equal to the freeway length and where the two-lane off-ramp has an option lane. Example F, example 6.2.1.1c, weaving segment. Several revisions were made to this section. First, real-world examples were added showing how to determine various inputs for a weaving segment. Second, information on the weaving influence area was added. Information was added for the weave short length and lane changing variables. Example number 1 shows a weaving segment with a one-lane on-ramp and a one-lane off-ramp without an option lane. The freeway length is 1,000 feet more than the weave short length because channelized lines do not exist downstream of the on-ramp painted gore and do not exist upstream of the off-ramp painted gore. This also applies to examples 2 and 3. Example number 2 shows a weaving segment with a one-lane on-ramp and a two-lane off-ramp without an option lane. Example number 3 shows a weaving segment with a two-lane on-ramp and a one-lane off-ramp without an option lane. Example number 4 shows a weaving segment with a one-lane on-ramp and a two-lane off-ramp with an option lane. The freeway length is more than 1,000 feet than the weave short length because the channelized line starts upstream of the off-ramp painted gore. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1d, overlap segment. Real-world examples have been added showing how to determine various inputs for an overlap segment. 3 figures were added showing cases where the gore-to-gore distance is more than 3,000 feet, equal to 3,000 feet, and less than 3,000 feet. Example number 1 shows an overlap segment with a one-lane on-ramp and a one-lane off-ramp where the acceleration and deceleration lanes are not within the overlap segment. Example number 2 shows an overlap segment with a one-lane on-ramp and a one-lane off-ramp where the acceleration lane is within the overlap segment and the deceleration lane is not within the overlap segment. For this case, the length of the acceleration length is truncated at the end of the merged segment. Example number 3 shows an overlap segment with a one-lane on-ramp and a one-lane off-ramp where the acceleration lane is not within the overlap segment and the deceleration lane is within the overlap segment. For this case, the length of the deceleration length is truncated at the end of the overlap segment. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1e, basic segment. Basic segments are generally located between merge, diverge, and weaving segments. A few examples have been added where this differs. Example number 1 shows where there is a 2-lane basic segment followed by a 3-lane basic segment. For this case, the length of the 2-lane segment is measured to the point where there are 3 full-width lanes. Example number 2 shows where there is a 3-lane basic segment followed by a 2-lane basic segment. For this case, the length of the 3-lane segment is measured to the point where the 3 full-width lanes end. Example number 3 shows where there are 2 4-lane basic segments where the posted speed limit changes. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1f, other facilities scenarios. This section was added as a placeholder to provide examples not covered by the previous examples. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1G, facilities examples. This example was added with the last OATS manual revision, but was renamed. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1H, facilities additional guidance. As previously stated, when HCS facilities is used, ODOT requires the analyst to measure and submit the various links in Google Earth. The examples previously covered will be placed on ODOT's website. For consistency, ODOT has established the following criteria, including lane color and width. Appendix F, example 6.2.1.1I, other analyses. This section was added as a placeholder to provide examples not covered by the previous examples. One example could be where two one-lane ramps converge to form a two-lane segment. Section 6.2.2, interrupted flow applications. Examples 1 through 6 previously had the wrong reference and were corrected. Section 6.2.2.1, signalized intersections in urban streets. ODOT now requires the storage length for all movements to be measured and submitted in Google Earth when preparing analyses with HCS streets. Appendix F, example 6.2.2.1b, storage length. When HCS streets is used, ODOT requires the analyst to measure and submit the various links in Google Earth. A sample Google Earth KMZ file will be placed on ODOT's website as an example. For consistency, ODOT has established the following criteria, including lane color and width. Section 7.5.2, summary of transmodeler results. This is a new section added. Example 7.5.2a was added, which shows a good example of how to summarize the transmodeler results for signalized intersections. For this example, the individual movements show the level of service, delay, 95th percent Q, max spillback, and spillback rate. The approaches and intersection show the level of service and delay. Section 9.2, Reviewer's Checklist. ODOT requires checklists to be submitted when HCS facilities or HCS streets analyses are prepared starting July 1, 2025. When preparing analyses with HCS facilities, a 7-page checklist is required to be submitted. The first 2 pages show a screenshot of the General and Segments tab with information for the various required inputs. The first page has checkboxes for what segment types are analyzed. If a segment type is not analyzed, then the information on that page can be left blank. Pages 1 and 2 are always required to be filled out. The analyst only needs to submit one checklist per project. For example, a freeway project is analyzed for both directions where each direction has multiple merge, diverge, and basic segments. The assumption is the analyst applies the basic segments checklist to all basic segments, and likewise the same with the merge and diverge segments. Pages 3 through 5 show a screenshot of the Details tab for a basic, merge, and diverge segments. Pages 6 and 7 show a screenshot of the Details tab for weaving and overlap segments. When preparing analyses with HCS streets, a 3-page checklist is required to be submitted. The first page includes general information, including the date the checklist is prepared, who prepared it, who completed the traffic analyses, what district the project is in, the county route section, PID, study type, and what version of HCS was used. It also includes information for the quick start window. The second page is a screenshot of the primary input data with information for the various required inputs. The last page is a screenshot of the details input data with information for the various required inputs. The analyst only needs to submit one checklist per project. For example, a corridor is analyzed with 4 signalized intersections for the no build and build conditions for the AM and PM peak hours. The assumption is the analyst applies the checklist to all the analyzed signalized intersections. If you have questions, please contact Jen, Mary, or I. Thanks for watching.